Where is it? There's level 2 on the storm scale.
In 2016, Mark Rosewater started speaking about the storm scale, which is the likelihood that mechanics will return in future sets. And this is a video of level 2 mechanics. Things that we'll see again, but not necessarily right away. Also known as deciduous design tools. Let's get going.
The first mechanic that is level 2 on the storm scale is anchor words. Anchor words were first introduced in Fate Reforged, where the siege cycle had the choice between cons and dragons. It's effectively where you have flavor words that identifies two different mechanics of something or a choice between two different things. So like Mirren and Phyrexian in Modern Horizons, or NCR and Legion in Fallout, things like that. Next is blood, which is generally mechanically tied to vampires, mostly in black and red. Currently, they only appear on blood tokens, which has tap and sacrifice and discard a card to draw a card. And fun fact, blood tokens actually prompted a rules change where the word token is now in the names of all tokens. So for example, a blood token is not named blood, it's named blood token, which removes the possibility of like Pithing Needle effects naming blood and it affecting different cards, for example, flesh and blood. Next is a cantrip, which is a slang term for a card that replaces itself. Generally they're used so more useful cards can be drawn faster. It's called thinning your deck, and are named after a Dungeons and Dragons term for a spell with not a lot of effects and no cost. Next is a charge counter, which is special compared to other counters because they are often named and mechanically referenced on other cards. And despite how common they are, they're only been used by a single keyworded mechanic, which is Sunburst. Next is Clue, which is similar to Blood. It's a token type with an artifact where you pay 2 mana, sacrifice it, and you draw a card. But not similar to Blood, there are some non-token clues, like Candy Trail, Red Herring, stuff like that. Colored artifacts are also level 2 on the Storm scale, which are basically artifacts with a colored mana cost, which at the beginning of Magic didn't really exist, but allows for artifacts to be mana specific, which is really cool. Next is a Curse, which is an enchantment type, like an aura, that give like a bad effect to a player. There aren't any special rules for curses, they're kind of just auras that enchant players. That's it. Equipment, which is actually kind of weird to me that this is not evergreen, is level 2 on the storm scale, which is a type of normally artifact that attaches to a creature and does some sort of effect. Next up is flashback, which is a keyword given to instants and sorceries, which allows you to pay some flashback cost to be able to cast it from their graveyard. However, it's exiled after it leaves the stack. First printed in Odyssey block, and then in Phyrexian Albion, they decided to make flashback significantly more common. Next up is food tokens, similar to blood and clue. It's a type of artifact. However, similar to clues, there are some actual cards that have the food type where you pay 2 mana, tap it, sacrifice it, and gain 3 life. There's also a lot of mechanics centered around like sacrificing a food or having food on the battlefield, and was originally made because they realized that fairy tales had a ton of food references and having a food token would allow them to design a lot of really cool cards. Next up is hexproof, that can prevent a permanent or player from being the target of spells or abilities played by their opponents. Not to be confused with Shroud, which means you can't be a target of anything. Hexproof only affects the opponents. Hexproof first came around in the 2012 core set, eventually became evergreen, and is primarily in blue, secondarily in green, white, tertiary. Hybrid mana is also level 2 in the storm scale. It is a mana that was first introduced in Ravnica Cydia guilds and effectively represents a cost that can be paid with either of 2 separate colors. It's often used on cards or sets with some sort of multicolor theme, again like Ravnica block. Investigate is a keyword action that was introduced in Shadows over Innistrad that creates a clue token. So many things that happen to be creating clue tokens that eventually just needed the keyword, especially as clues became more and more common. Keyword counters were first introduced in Ikora Layer of Behemoths, but effectively they're a counter that gets put on a permanent that gives it a certain keyword, like hexproof counter, flying counter, things like that. It's a way to give a keyword to a permanent permanently rather than till end of turn. It's a visual thing that can represent it, and all around pretty cool. Phasing is a cool mechanic where permanents can phase out and be treated like they don't exist, but they aren't leaving the battlefield or entering the battlefield. It was originally created by the Mirage design team, and then was not revisited for a very long time until Commander 2017 and Teferi's Protection, and became common starting with Adventures in Forgotten Realms. Next is Planeswalkers, which, while are the thematic identities of the players, are a special card type that can be activated once per turn for some sort of loyalty cost. Next is Protection, which is one of the very few rules that has not been changed over the course of the game's history. Protection means it can't be damaged by a source that it is referring to, enchanted, equipped, or fortified, blocked, or targeted. It has existed since Alpha. Next is Prowess, where creatures get +1/+1 till end of turn whenever a non-creature spell is cast. It was actually created by Jonathan Laux, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that last name right, in the second Great Designer Search, because they wanted a need for blue to get a combat relevant keyword that wasn't about evasion. And prowess is secondarily in red and tertiarily in white. Next is a saga, which tells a story as it unfolds during each one of your turns and goes through the chapters and different abilities on the saga. It starts with one lore counter, and then every turn it gets another lore counter, and a chapter ability of the corresponding number to the lore counters that are on it is triggered when those lore counters get put on it. Saga design was actually directly derived from the original Planeswalker design for Future Sight, even got double face treatment in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and even gave rise to things like Urza Saga, which is an enchantment land, which also has the Urza's land type, and is only the second true colorless enchantment and first 0-mana saga. Next, split card, which have two faces on the front side, where you can cast either side in most scenarios, normal split cards. And they have a bunch of rules behind them where effectively in any zone except for the stack, a split card has a combination of both characteristics, including the combined mana value. And since then, split cards have gotten a lot of mechanics alongside them, like Aftermath and Fuse, and have slowly become more and more common. Next is Transform, which is a keyword action that turns double face cards onto the back side, originally for werewolves and Innistrad, like original double face cards. Makes sense, if double face cards are level 2, then Transform kind of has to be level 2. Next is the Treasure, which similar to the other artifact tokens is created by things, and you can sacrifice it to produce a mana of any color. Similar to gold, but unlike gold, it requires treasure to be tapped. Originally, red was supposed to be the primary and green was the secondary to treasure, but in practice, blue seems to have a little bit more than green. Black seems to have some sort of additional cost associated with getting treasure, where blue gets it for flavor reasons, kind of like pirates. And similar to these other artifact tokens, there are some non-token treasures as well, all having that same ability where you can sacrifice them for a mana of any color. Vanilla is the next mechanic, which is the slang term that refers to creatures without rules text. I think it's funny that this is on the storm scale at all, but it's just vanilla creatures. And the last level 2 storm scale mechanic is Vehicle, which is first introduced in Kaladesh and Aether Revolt, and then after Dominaria became level 2 in the storm scale and came back most sets. They are artifacts that just behave as an artifact until they are crewed for a certain number of power of creatures crewing it, and then it becomes a creature. Since then, vehicles have been printed that have abilities that don't require crewing, and like every other mechanic, has evolved over time.
That is all the Judicious design tools, the level 2 on the storm scale. If you like this video and more videos like this, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social media. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.